The most dangerous words ever spoken inside a courtroom are not guilty or not guilty. They are, I've already made up my mind. The words would later echo through every news report covering what happened that rainy Tuesday morning inside Franklin County Courthouse. But at exactly 9:12 a.m., no one in courtroom 4 had any idea they were about to witness a lesson that would challenge everything they believed about authority, prejudice, and justice. The courtroom carried the familiar weight of routine. Rows of polished oak benches stretched beneath tall windows where gray clouds filtered the morning light into long pale ribbons across the marble floor. Attorneys organized thick binders with practiced efficiency. Court reporters tested their recording equipment. Deputies exchanged quiet remarks near the entrance while spectators whispered among themselves, waiting for another ordinary hearing to begin. Everything felt predictable. Everything felt controlled. Then the side door opened. Judge Harold Bennett entered the courtroom with the measured confidence of a man who had spent nearly 3 decades behind the bench. His black robe flowed behind him as every person in the room rose to their feet. All rise. The bailiff's voice echoed against the high ceiling. Judge Bennett acknowledged the room with a brief nod before settling into his chair. He adjusted the files stacked neatly before him and surveyed the courtroom with sharp, experienced eyes. He had presided over thousands of cases. He prided himself on reading people within moments of seeing them. Most believed he rarely made mistakes. Sometimes confidence quietly disguises itself as certainty. And certainty, left unchecked, can become something far more dangerous. Near the front row, a black woman sat alone with a leather portfolio resting neatly on her lap. She wore a navy blue blazer over a simple cream blouse, tailored slacks, and understated black heels. No expensive jewelry caught the light. No title appeared on her clothing. Her expression remained composed, her posture straight, her attention focused on the documents inside the folder she carried with both hands. She neither sought attention nor attempted to disappear. She simply waited. 2 white police officers standing near the courtroom entrance noticed her almost immediately. Officer Ryan Collins leaned slightly toward his partner, Officer Mark Sullivan, before quietly saying something neither the attorneys nor the spectators could hear. Both officers glanced toward the woman again. Their expressions shifted almost imperceptibly. Curiosity became suspicion. Suspicion quickly hardened into confidence. They began walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. The conversations around the courtroom continued uninterrupted, but several nearby spectators instinctively looked up as the officers approached. The woman calmly closed her folder before either officer spoke. "Ma'am," Officer Collins said, stopping directly in front of her. "This seating area is reserved." His tone remained polite on the surface, but something beneath it carried an unmistakable edge. The woman looked up with calm, attentive eyes. "Good morning, officer. May I ask what business you have in this courtroom?" She answered without hesitation. "I'm here because the court requested my presence." Collins exchanged a brief glance with Sullivan. "Do you have documentation?" "Yes." She rested one hand lightly on the portfolio. "It's inside my case file." Before she could open it, Collins raised a hand. "Not yet." Several attorneys looked over briefly before returning to their paperwork. The exchange still appeared ordinary. Judge Bennett glanced toward the interaction from the bench. Rather than asking what had happened, he simply observed the officers standing over the seated woman. For several quiet seconds, no one spoke. Then, without requesting clarification or reviewing a single document, the judge leaned slightly forward. His voice carried effortlessly through the silent courtroom. "If she cannot immediately establish why she belongs here, remove her from my courtroom." Every conversation stopped. Every page stopped turning. The woman slowly lifted her eyes toward the bench. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply met the judge's gaze with remarkable composure, as though she had expected this moment long before. Anyone else in the room realized it was coming. And somewhere beneath the growing silence, the first crack had already appeared in the certainty that ruled the courtroom. 40 minutes earlier, the courthouse had looked exactly as it always did. People hurried through revolving doors carrying briefcases, legal pads, and steaming cups of coffee. Security officers greeted familiar attorneys with polite nods while metal detectors chimed at steady intervals. Outside, a light rain covered the granite steps with a silver sheen, and inside, the warm scent of polished wood mixed with the quiet murmur of legal conversations. Nothing about the morning suggested it would become unforgettable. Monica Hayes stepped through the security checkpoint with calm, deliberate movements. She wore a tailored navy blazer over a cream-colored blouse, dark slacks, and simple black heels that echoed softly against the marble floor. Her appearance was elegant without demanding attention. No badge hung around her neck. No federal credentials were displayed. The leather portfolio she carried looked no different from dozens of others passing through the courthouse that morning. That was intentional. Monica had learned years earlier that titles often spoke louder than character, and she preferred people to reveal themselves before they ever discovered who she was. The security officer briefly examined her identification, compared it with the visitor authorization already entered into the courthouse system, and smiled politely. "You're all set, ma'am." "Thank you," Monica replied with the same quiet warmth she offered everyone she met. She continued toward courtroom 4 without looking hurried. Every step reflected years of professional discipline. Every breath reflected patience. She had appeared inside federal courtrooms countless times before. She had questioned witnesses, negotiated complex legal matters, and represented the interests of the United States in cases carrying enormous public significance. Yet she never carried herself as though authority belonged to her alone. To Monica, the law deserved humility before confidence. Along the hallway, young attorneys nervously rehearsed opening statements beneath their breath. Court clerks pushed carts stacked with case files from one courtroom to another. Deputies exchanged updates about the day's crowded docket. The building operated like a carefully synchronized machine, every person performing a role that depended upon trust in the legal process. Monica paused briefly beneath a framed inscription engraved into the courthouse wall. "Equal justice under law." She looked at the words for only a moment before continuing toward the courtroom entrance. They had inspired her when she first entered law school. They inspired her still. But experience had also taught her that principles engraved into stone meant very little unless people were willing to live by them. Inside courtroom 4, she quietly selected a seat near the front, placed her portfolio neatly on her lap, and reviewed several documents she had been instructed to bring under seal. She neither introduced herself nor sought recognition from anyone around her. There would be time for formalities once the hearing began. Across the room, 2 white police officers entered through the side door, speaking casually as they surveyed the spectators gathering inside. Their conversation gradually faded as their attention settled on Monica sitting alone near counsel's row. Officer Ryan Collins slowed his pace almost imperceptibly. Officer Mark Sullivan followed his gaze without saying a word. Neither officer knew her name. Neither officer had reviewed the court's witness list. Yet before either of them had spoken a single sentence, an assumption had already begun to shape the decisions they were about to make. Some people announce their importance the moment they enter a room. Others never have to. Monica Hayes belonged to the second kind. She sat quietly near the front of courtroom 4, reviewing the sealed documents inside her leather portfolio one final time before the hearing. Her movements were unhurried, precise, almost effortless. Years of federal service had taught her that preparation created confidence, and confidence never needed to become arrogance. Around her, the courtroom continued filling with attorneys greeting colleagues, clerks, arranging files, and spectators searching for empty seats. To everyone else, Monica appeared to be another visitor waiting for the proceedings to begin. No one noticed the careful habit of scanning every entrance without appearing distracted. No one recognized the calm awareness that came from countless hours inside federal courtrooms where every word carried legal consequences. She blended into the room because she chose to. Her position had never been about attracting attention. It had always been about protecting the integrity of the process. An elderly woman seated beside her smiled politely. "First time here?" Monica returned the smile with quiet kindness. "No, ma'am. You seem awfully calm." Monica glanced toward the judge's bench before answering. "Experience teaches patience." The woman chuckled softly. "I wish more people learned that lesson." Monica simply nodded. She had spent years representing the United States in complicated criminal prosecutions, public corruption cases, and federal investigations. She had questioned powerful witnesses without raising her voice. She had faced hostile attorneys without losing her composure. She had learned that people often revealed more about themselves when they believed no one important was watching. That lesson had served her well throughout her career. It would serve her again today. Across the courtroom, Officer Ryan Collins continued watching her. Something about her calm demeanor unsettled him. Most visitors appeared nervous before hearings. Some repeatedly checked their phones. Others whispered anxiously with attorneys or family members. Monica did none of those things. She simply waited with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Collins interpreted that confidence differently. "See the folder?" he quietly asked Officer Mark Sullivan. Sullivan nodded. "Looks official." Collins frowned slightly. "Or she's trying to make it look official." Neither officer considered another possibility. They never asked whether her presence had already been authorized. They never checked the witness schedule waiting at the clerk's desk only a few feet away. Instead, assumptions quietly filled the empty spaces where facts should have been. Monica noticed them looking in her direction more than once. She neither looked away nor stared back. She understood the difference between awareness and confrontation. Outside, rain tapped gently against the courthouse windows, while inside, the low hum of conversation slowly faded. The hearing would begin within minutes. Somewhere behind the bench, Judge Harold Bennett prepared to enter the courtroom. Nearby, the bailiff adjusted his uniform before checking the courtroom clock. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet without realizing it, nearly everyone inside that room had already become part of a story that would not be remembered because of a verdict. It would be remembered because one assumption, accepted too quickly, was about to place justice itself on trial. The first mistake was not asking a question. It was believing there was no need to. Officer Ryan Collins walked toward Monica Hayes with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Officer Mark Sullivan followed one step behind, saying nothing as they stopped beside her seat. Around them, conversations continued in low voices, but several nearby attorneys instinctively glanced in their direction. They recognized the familiar pattern of an encounter growing more serious than it needed to be. Collins offered a brief, professional smile that never reached his eyes. "Ma'am, may I see your identification?" Monica looked up calmly. "Of course." She reached into her portfolio and removed a government-issued identification card along with a folded court authorization. Before she could hand over both documents, Collins accepted only the identification card. He barely looked at it before slipping it back into her hand. The authorization remained untouched. "Why are you seated in this section?" he asked. "I was instructed to report here before the hearing." "By whom?" "The court." Her answer was clear, respectful, and direct. Collins frowned slightly. "Which attorney are you with?" "I'm here in an official capacity." The response should have invited another question. Instead, it seemed to reinforce a conclusion already forming in his mind. Sullivan crossed his arms. "Official capacity?" Monica nodded once. "Yes." She made no effort to elaborate. Experience had taught her that explanations offered too early were often ignored by people who had already decided what they wished to believe. Collins glanced toward the nearly empty counsel tables. "I don't see anyone waiting for you." "The hearing hasn't begun yet." "That wasn't my question." The tone had changed. It remained controlled, but the courtesy was beginning to fade. Nearby, an assistant prosecutor quietly watched while organizing files. A law student sitting in the second row stopped highlighting her notes. Even the court reporter looked up briefly before returning to the keyboard. No voices were raised. Yet the tension was becoming impossible to miss. Monica remained seated with relaxed shoulders and both hands resting lightly on her portfolio. She neither interrupted nor challenged the officers. She simply answered what she was asked. Collins looked toward Sullivan before speaking again. "Ma'am, until we verify your purpose here, I'd like you to move to the public seating area." Monica met his gaze without hesitation. "Officer, I'm exactly where the court instructed me to be." There was no irritation in her voice. Only quiet certainty. Collins interpreted certainty as resistance. He glanced toward the judge's bench, where Judge Harold Bennett had just entered through the private chamber behind the courtroom. The judge had not heard the entire conversation. He saw only two officers standing before a woman seated near counsel's row. Without requesting clarification or asking to review the authorization Monica still held in plain view, he observed the scene from a distance. Appearances often speak first. Facts sometimes arrive later. The courtroom gradually fell silent as the bailiff prepared to announce the beginning of the session. Yet before the first case could even be called, a single assumption had already begun shaping the course of the morning, and no one in the room realized how expensive that assumption was about to become. Authority becomes most dangerous when it mistakes confidence for proof. The courtroom had fallen completely silent. Every conversation had stopped the moment Judge Harold Bennett spoke from the bench. "If she cannot immediately establish why she belongs here, remove her from my courtroom." His words carried the unquestioned weight of judicial authority. No one challenged them. No one asked whether the woman had already attempted to present her documentation. No one asked whether the officers had actually reviewed it. The order itself became enough. Officer Ryan Collins turned back toward Monica Hayes with renewed certainty. "You heard the judge, ma'am." Monica remained seated for another quiet moment before slowly standing. She picked up her leather portfolio with both hands, careful not to make any sudden movements. Her composure stood in sharp contrast to the growing tension surrounding her. "Your Honor," she said respectfully, looking toward the bench rather than the officers, "may I have a brief opportunity to present the court authorization I was instructed to bring?" Judge Bennett barely glanced in her direction. "You may do so after your status has been verified outside the courtroom." Monica answered without raising her voice. "Respectfully, Your Honor, the authorization itself verifies my status." Before she could open the folder, Collins stepped slightly closer. "Ma'am, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Several spectators exchanged uncomfortable glances. An older attorney quietly removed his glasses, watching the exchange with growing concern. The assistant prosecutor sitting near counsel's table appeared ready to speak, then hesitated. No one wanted to interrupt a judge in open court. Bennett folded his hands on the bench. "Officer, proceed." 3 simple words. They carried far greater weight than anyone realized. Collins extended one hand toward the courtroom doors. "Please come with us." Monica looked briefly at the authorization still resting inside her portfolio. It remained unseen. Unopened. Unread. She closed the folder again without removing a single page. "Very well," she replied. "I'll comply." There was no anger in her voice. No sarcasm. Only quiet professionalism. As she took a single step into the aisle, whispers spread softly across the gallery. "I guess she wasn't supposed to be here. She should have brought the right paperwork. Maybe the officers already checked." Assumptions multiplied with remarkable speed. Facts had never been given the same opportunity. Collins escorted Monica toward the courtroom entrance while Sullivan followed a few steps behind. Neither officer noticed the sealed Department of Justice envelope partially visible inside her portfolio. Neither recognized the federal case number printed across its cover. They had stopped looking for evidence the moment they believed they had reached a conclusion. Just before reaching the doorway, Monica paused. She turned slightly toward the bench one final time. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "for the record, I have complied with every instruction given to me today." Judge Bennett offered only a brief nod before looking down at the next case file waiting on his bench. Noted. The hearing prepared to continue. Yet outside the courtroom, only a few feet beyond the heavy oak doors, a federal security liaison was walking down the hallway carrying a file labeled with one name. Monica Hayes. Within moments, the courtroom that believed it had resolved a simple security concern would discover it had made a mistake no one inside could quietly erase. Sometimes the truth does not arrive with raised voices. Sometimes it simply walks through the right door at the right moment. Officer Ryan Collins had just guided Monica Hayes into the hallway outside courtroom 4 when the elevator at the far end opened with a quiet chime. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out carrying a sealed government file embossed with the gold seal of the United States Department of Justice. Beside him walked a courthouse security liaison scanning the corridor with growing concern. "Excuse me," the liaison called as he approached. "Has anyone seen Ms. Monica Hayes?" Collins turned toward the voice. "Who's asking?" The man extended a federal credential without hesitation. "Special Agent David Mercer, Department of Justice." Collins glanced briefly at the identification before returning it. "Why?" Mercer looked past the officers and immediately recognized Monica standing calmly beside them. "There you are." His expression shifted from relief to confusion. "We've been looking for you. The judge is expecting you in courtroom 4. An uneasy silence settled over the hallway. Collins frowned. "She's being removed until we verify who she is." Mercer blinked once, clearly believing he had misunderstood. "Verify?" Monica answered before the conversation could escalate. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Mercer slowly looked from Monica to the officers. "A misunderstanding?" He raised the government file slightly. "This contains the federal authorization signed 3 weeks ago assigning Assistant United States Attorney Monica Hayes to today's proceeding." Collins' confident posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Assistant United States Attorney?" Mercer nodded. "Yes." He opened the folder and withdrew several official documents bearing Department of Justice letterhead and the court scheduling order. She was requested to appear as counsel representing the interests of the United States in this matter. Collins stared at the papers without speaking. Sullivan quietly shifted his weight beside him. Neither officer reached for the documents. Neither seemed certain what to say next. Monica remained composed. She had not interrupted. She had not corrected anyone earlier. She had simply waited for the facts to arrive on their own. Mercer looked toward the closed courtroom doors. "Has the hearing started?" Collins hesitated. The judge ordered her removed. For the first time since entering the hallway, Mercer allowed surprise to show across his face. The judge ordered the Assistant United States Attorney removed. Before Collins could answer, the heavy oak doors opened. The bailiff stepped into the corridor carrying a case file. He stopped abruptly after recognizing Mercer and the Department of Justice seal resting atop the documents. "Agent Mercer?" "Yes." "The court is ready for Ms. Hayes." Mercer looked toward Monica. "I believe we've kept the court waiting long enough." The bailiff's expression changed as his eyes moved from Monica to the 2 officers standing beside her. He suddenly understood that something had gone terribly wrong. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harold Bennett was preparing to call the next matter on the docket, unaware that only a few feet beyond the doors, the assumption that had shaped his earlier decision had already begun collapsing beneath the undeniable weight of official federal authority. Truth has a way of changing the atmosphere before it changes anyone's mind. The bailiff pushed open the heavy courtroom doors, holding them wide as Monica Hayes and Special Agent David Mercer walked back inside together. Their footsteps echoed across the polished marble floor, drawing every eye in the courtroom. Conversation stopped instantly. Attorneys lowered their pens. Spectators leaned forward. Even Judge Harold Bennett paused as he looked up from the case file resting before him. His attention settled first on Agent Mercer's Department of Justice credentials, then on the federal folder in his hands, and finally on Monica herself. The same woman he had ordered removed only moments earlier now returned with unmistakable federal representation standing beside her. Mercer approached the bench with calm professionalism. "Good morning, Your Honor." Bennett gave a measured nod. "Good morning. May I ask the purpose of this interruption?" Mercer placed the sealed file on the clerk's desk before answering. "Your Honor, I believe the court has unintentionally removed the Assistant United States Attorney assigned to today's proceeding." The words settled over the courtroom like complete silence. Judge Bennett did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked toward Monica, then toward officers Ryan Collins and Mark Sullivan, both of whom remained standing near the courtroom entrance. Neither officer spoke. Mercer continued. "This file contains the Department of Justice appointment, the court's official scheduling order, and the federal authorization requesting Assistant United States Attorney Monica Hayes to appear before this court today." The courtroom clerk quickly accepted the documents and carried them to the bench. Judge Bennett carefully opened the folder. One page after another confirmed exactly what Mercer had said. Official. Department of Justice letterhead. Federal case assignment. Court authorization bearing the clerk's certification. Every signature. Every seal. Every date. The judge quietly examined each page before lifting his eyes toward Monica. "Ms. Hayes." Monica answered with the same calm respect she had shown from the beginning. "Yes, Your Honor." Bennett removed his glasses slowly. "Why didn't you identify yourself earlier?" Monica's expression remained composed. "Your Honor, I attempted to present my court authorization several times. I believed the documents would speak more clearly than my title. No accusation. No bitterness. Only a simple statement of fact." Those words carried more weight than any argument could have. Judge Bennett turned toward Officer Collins. "Officer, were these documents ever reviewed?" Collins swallowed quietly before answering. "No, Your Honor." "Were they offered?" A brief pause followed. "Yes, Your Honor." The admission lingered in the silence that followed. Around the courtroom, expressions changed one after another. The assistant prosecutor who had remained silent earlier slowly lowered his eyes. Several attorneys exchanged uncomfortable glances. Spectators who had quietly assumed the officers were correct now understood how easily appearances had replaced verification. Judge Bennett looked back at Monica. For the first time that morning, certainty had disappeared from his face. In its place stood something far more appropriate inside a courtroom. Reflection. Yet the hearing itself had only just begun, and before the morning ended, the evidence would reveal that the greatest mistake had not been removing a federal prosecutor. It had been allowing assumptions to outrank the truth. Evidence does not raise its voice. It simply refuses to change its story. Judge Harold Bennett remained silent for several long moments as the courtroom clerk handed him the complete federal file. Every page confirmed what Assistant United States Attorney Monica Hayes had calmly tried to establish from the beginning. The court authorization had been issued weeks earlier. Her appearance had been formally requested. Her credentials had been verified before she even entered the building that morning. Nothing about her presence had been unauthorized. The only failure had been the willingness to examine the documents before reaching a conclusion. The judge slowly closed the folder and looked toward the clerk. "Please enter these documents into the record." "Yes, Your Honor." The clerk immediately complied. Bennett then turned toward the court's security supervisor, who had quietly entered the courtroom after learning what had occurred. I would also like the security log from this morning, including visitor verification records. Within minutes, the supervisor returned with the electronic entry report. It showed that Monica Hayes had presented valid government identification at the security checkpoint, where her authorization had been confirmed and electronically recorded before she proceeded upstairs. The timestamp matched exactly. The security officer who had processed her entry was called forward. Did Ms. Hayes comply with courthouse procedures? Judge Bennett asked. Yes, Your Honor, the officer answered without hesitation. Her identification and court authorization were verified before she entered the building. There were no issues. The courtroom grew even quieter. Judge Bennett looked toward Officer Ryan Collins. Were you aware her credentials had already been verified through courthouse security? Collins lowered his eyes briefly. No, Your Honor. Did you inquire before requesting her removal? Collins answered honestly. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded slowly before requesting one final piece of evidence. Has courtroom surveillance from this morning been preserved? The courtroom technology specialist confirmed that it had. Moments later, the footage appeared on the courtroom monitor. There was no dramatic confrontation. No raised voices. The recording showed Monica calmly attempting to present both her government identification and court authorization. It showed Officer Collins accepting only one document while declining to examine the authorization she repeatedly offered. It showed Monica remaining respectful throughout every exchange. Most importantly, it showed the judge issuing his removal order before the authorization had ever been reviewed. No one argued with the recording because recordings have no opinions. They simply preserve facts. Around the courtroom, expressions shifted from curiosity to quiet reflection. Attorneys who had remained silent earlier now understood exactly how quickly assumptions had replaced procedure. Officer Mark Sullivan stood motionless beside his partner, realizing the evidence contradicted every conclusion they had acted upon. Monica herself never interrupted the presentation. She stood with the same composed posture she had maintained since arriving that morning. She had never needed to defend herself against speculation. She had trusted that verified facts would eventually do what emotions never could. Judge Bennett carefully removed his reading glasses and rested them on the bench. The courtroom had begun the morning believing authority alone would determine the outcome. Now every person inside understood something far more important. Authority earns legitimacy only when it is disciplined enough to follow the evidence wherever the truth leads. Justice rarely restores itself through dramatic speeches. More often, it returns quietly, one truthful decision at a time. Judge Harold Bennett remained seated for a long moment after the courtroom monitor went dark. The silence carried more weight than any objection or closing argument ever could. Every person inside courtroom 4 had witnessed the same sequence of events. Every document had been verified. Every timestamp had matched. Every opportunity to prevent the misunderstanding had existed long before assumptions replaced procedure. Finally, the judge stood. The record will reflect, he began, his voice steady but noticeably more measured than before, that Assistant United States Attorney Monica Hayes was lawfully authorized to appear before this court, that her credentials had been properly verified upon entering the courthouse, and that the court acted before reviewing the documentation she repeatedly attempted to present. No one interrupted. No one could. The record spoke for itself. Judge Bennett turned toward Monica. Ms. Hayes, this court acknowledges that you were not afforded the procedural fairness every participant deserves. On behalf of this court, I extend my apology. Monica met his eyes with quiet professionalism. Thank you, Your Honor. She offered no celebration. No criticism. No satisfaction. She accepted the apology with the same dignity she had carried throughout the entire morning. The judge then looked toward Officers Ryan Collins and Mark Sullivan. This matter will be referred through the appropriate administrative channels for review of courtroom procedures and decision-making. Collins lowered his head slightly. Yes, Your Honor. There was no argument. Only acceptance that accountability begins when responsibility is acknowledged. Around the courtroom, attorneys quietly gathered their files. The assistant prosecutor who had remained silent earlier walked past Monica before pausing briefly. "Counselor," he said respectfully, "I'm sorry for what happened." Monica offered a small nod. "Thank you." Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, reflecting across the wet courthouse steps in scattered flashes of gold. People exited the building one by one, returning to their ordinary lives, yet many carried an extraordinary lesson with them. They had entered the courtroom believing appearance could answer questions. They left understanding that justice demands something greater. As Monica stepped through the courthouse doors, Special Agent David Mercer walked beside her. "You handled that with remarkable restraint," he said quietly. Monica looked back once toward the courthouse before answering. "The law is strongest when the people who serve it refuse to become part of the problem." Mercer smiled faintly. "Not everyone could have done what you did today." Monica continued down the steps without slowing. "The goal was never to prove who I was. The goal was to make sure the truth had the opportunity to speak." Behind them, the courthouse doors slowly closed. The building remained the same. The courtroom remained the same. Even the people inside remained the same. What had changed was their understanding that authority is never measured by a robe, a badge, or a title alone. It is measured by the discipline to seek facts before reaching conclusions, the humility to admit mistakes when the evidence demands it, and the courage to protect the dignity of every person equally. Because justice is not remembered for the moment power speaks first. It is remembered for the moment truth speaks last.